This is Times Radio with Carole Walker.
Now, out on the campaign trail in Grimsby today, Sir Keir Starmer told trainee mechanics he has driving in his blood as he pledged to repair 1 million potholes annually if Labour wins the election. His comments follow a Conservative promise last Friday to back drivers with a promise to curb what it called unnecessary restrictions on drivers, such as London's ultra-low emission zone. So, which of the parties is going to win the motorists' vote? I've been speaking to Quentin Willson, former Top Gear host and a motoring journalist, and Chaitanya Kumar, head of environment and green transition at the New Economics Foundation. And I began by asking Quentin what he makes of Labour's promises to drivers.
I think it's quite unprecedented, really, because you've got both political parties saying they have a plan for drivers. And I've been around transport ministers for the last 20 years and going in and asking about fuel duty and how to teach younger drivers better and less onerous enforcement. You were always feeling like you were a naughty schoolboy in the headmaster's office because it was 2 wheels good, 4 wheels bad. So this is a really big shift. And I guess with 50 million licence holders in the UK, they both realised that this is a potential key to those floating voters who don't know which way to go. And if they can prove, and I think this is the interesting point, if they can credibly prove either party that they are going to make things better, then you might swing some votes your way.
Yeah, we've had the Labour leader saying, I love driving, it's been in my blood. I think particularly if you grow up in a rural area, I wouldn't say petrol head, but I've always loved driving. And Chaitanya, some of his political opponents are somewhat raising their eyebrows at that, given that Labour has been behind, of course, in London, the very controversial ULEZ zone, the low traffic neighbourhoods, the low speed limits in Wales, and the push has been towards getting people out of their cars.
Yes, and I think that is the perception they're trying to fight. What's been interesting is both parties clearly seem to be trading blows on who is waging a bigger war on motorists. But I guess what's unfortunate is the reality is that neither party is actively considering what is necessary, which is the transition away from private vehicles, private transport, and into more sustainable forms of transport. I think we know what they are: buses, trains, trams. All of these need heavy investment in the coming years. Nobody's under the illusion that we'll completely move away from private vehicles, but they are here to stay, and we are electrifying them, which is the good news. But if you really want to tackle climate change, and given transport emissions are one of the highest sources of emissions in the country, we really need to do more in terms of the sustainable shift from private mobility to more public and sustainable forms of mobility.
Quentin, I mean, I've been around long enough to actually remember John Prescott. Of course, he was known as Two Jags John. Even he had this big overall objective of getting people out of their cars and onto public transport. And that has succeeded to a degree, but in many rural areas, and I grew up in a rural area and still have family up there, public transport is frankly still not an option, is it?
You're right. I mean, that signature policy that John Prescott had, saying that I will get 10% of the public onto public transport, and cancelled all those road projects in 2000 because if you build more roads, more people will use them. It hasn't really worked. And I think while I completely agree with Chaitanya that we do need to do something about traffic levels and public transport, it's absolutely not a vote winner. And that's what they're concentrating on now. I think the fact that both parties have got electrification strategies is a good thing, but you're not going to get people. And the modal shift to public transport hasn't really happened in the 24 years since that policy. So I think you've got to be realistic and say let's do this, carry on doing it, but let's understand that roads are absolutely essential to the country's productivity and for the convenience of the electorate. And to deny that, I think, has been a really, really big problem for both parties for a long time. So concentrating on the fact that consumers will feel better if they feel their journeys are more reliable, quicker, smoother, and there'll be less unnecessary and onerous enforcement will get people interested, I think.
And Chaitanya, this comes at a time that both the main parties have somewhat moved away from their green commitments. Of course, there was the big decision by the Conservatives to push back that deadline for the sale of any more new non-electric cars, pushing that back by 5 years. We've had Labour ditching its £28 billion price tag for moving to cleaner, greener energy. And do you get this sense that, in a way, the parties feel that environmental policies have just got to play second fiddle at the moment to those cost of living questions?
I think yes and no would be my answer. I think when it comes to transport, especially cars, I'm actually less concerned about what politicians have to say about this, really. They can debate all they want about 2030, 2035. The writing is on the wall in terms of electric vehicles, the fact that they are coming in large numbers already. About a fifth of new sales are electric, or close to that in the country today, and they'll basically reach 100% by 2030, and that's where the market is headed. We can have these sort of debates with politicians, but the market and the industry is moving very fast, and battery prices are plummeting. In the last decade, the price of batteries has fallen by 80%. Now, that is a considerable fall. The Chinese manufacturers are producing huge volumes of very cheap electric cars. And once they start flooding the UK and Europe markets, there's very little reason for you to buy a petrol or diesel car because the electric option will be the cheapest and also the best option. So I think I'm less worried in that sense. But you're right. The yes to your question was more around the fact that I do agree that cost of living is proving to be a challenge. It is a challenge, of course, but I think pitting it against climate change and climate action would be the wrong way to go about tackling this problem. We at NEF continue to talk about how climate solutions and climate action can actually help mitigate the cost of living crisis. I think that's the kind of win-win approach that we need to take going forward.
Quentin, do you think there's a point in that in a sense, getting people, for example, to switch to electric cars is much more about when the price of electric cars come down? Because, I mean, they're still pretty expensive at the moment compared to a petrol or diesel version. And, of course, there have been the problems about infrastructure as well, haven't there? Charging points.
Yeah, the difference now between Conservatives and Labour is that the Conservatives have pivoted towards fossil fuels and away from those Borisisms where we would have all these wonderful charge points and all these electric cars. Whereas Labour, and I talked to Bill Esserton, Shadow Minister for Roads, quite a lot, and he's a very, very, very hard evangelical supporter of EVs, and they really are going to go for it and encourage battery factories and more electric car usage and more charging points. So that's a clear line of difference between the two. I think they've got to wrestle with the problem that we heard today from the EU that, do we put tariffs on electric cars and make them more expensive for consumers, the ones that come from China, or do we encourage China to build electric car factories in the UK and battery factories and encourage all that GDP and inward investment? And that's a really, really difficult one. But I think that there's now a clear line of demarcation between the two parties, whereas Labour wants electrification, whereas the Conservatives have moved away from it.
Does it worry you, Chaitanya, that we're seeing even the Labour Party now moving away from things like these low traffic neighbourhoods, which do tend to cause some anger locally, moving away from some of these very low speed limits, and just moving away from giving political leadership towards moving towards green transport? Yes,
I think we have Sadiq Khan as a fantastic example of someone who, as a Labour mayor, introduced ULEZ. Everybody thought that is going to be a big electoral issue that is going to be the cause of his downfall. And look what happened. That, of course, is the ultra-low emission zone where people of more polluting vehicles would have to pay to go into that area. Indeed, yes. But the result is, of course, he's come back as the mayor of London, and pollution levels have fallen and air quality levels have improved since the ULEZ. The latest report from, I think it was Bath University or Bristol University, did a detailed analysis. and showed how air quality has considerably improved in London, central London, and now we'll see more of that air quality benefits in outer London as well. I think that's a good example of not giving down to any sort of degree of pushback and pressure, but actually work with people to see, yes, there are genuine concerns around having to pay more, but introducing scrappage schemes, introducing other forms of mitigating measures much more proactively is the key, instead of having a knee-jerk reaction saying, yes, we're going to actually slow down or stall some of these measures is not the right way to go about it.
And Quentin, it's fascinating, isn't it, to hear both the two leaders who are vying to be our next Prime Minister setting out targets and specific funds to tackle potholes. I mean, we used to joke about this as being a local issue, and we do know that MPs do get a lot of contact from their constituents about this. But potholes are right up there on the political agenda.
Well, it's something that motoring consumers see every day. And, you know, I drive down the M40 and I'm having to swerve because there are potholes in the carriageway. And it's got to this seismic level where wherever you look, there is a gouge in the road. And this is because of neglect. And we've had 14 years of people saying they're going to fix it. And we've got this £14 billion backlog. And the problem is any political party that says that they're going to fix this, you know, in a timely manner could possibly fall on their sword, because it's a really, really big job. And it's not a question of putting new dollops of asphalt over old dollops of asphalt. You've got to really get the materials, new materials. You'll have to resurface large amount of roads and do it with the least inconvenience to drivers and the least congestion. So it's a really, really difficult one. But that would be the visible one that drivers could see that is really making a difference to their lives and to their safety and to the smoothness and reliability of their journeys.
Just finally, Chaitanya, what do you want to see from our political leaders when it comes to this question of just trying to get the right balance right between helping motorists, and many people have to be motorists because of where they live, because of the way their lives and their work commitments affect them, and just looking at the costs of it all?
I guess there's a saying that says, when you're in a ditch, stop digging. I think when, for example, Labour, for example, has committed to lots of housing and new towns, what would be very important to do when you're building this new housing is to ensure there's much better public transport, that you do not build this housing in places where the only way to get to these places and to shop and to go to a local surgery or whatever requires you to have four wheels. I think that is precisely what we have to avoid. I think Labour has some opportunities as we build supposedly millions of homes to do things different to how we have been doing over the last few decades. So that would be a clear opportunity for Labour in the coming 5 years.
Well, that was Chaitanya Kumar, Head of Environment and Green Transition at the New Economics Foundation, and Quentin Willson, former Top Gear host and a motoring journalist, speaking to me just a little earlier here on Times Radio.